He didn't build an empire with gold or oil. He built it with ink and paper, and he used it to start a war. This is the true story of William Randolph Hearst and the ruthless methodology known as the Code of Yellow Journalism. For decades, Hearst commanded the most feared media monopoly in the world. Over 7 parts, we will dissect the strategy that allowed him to manufacture public outrage and control national policy, from the ruthless circulation, or that led him to deliberately sink a U.S. warship, to the total vertical integration that controlled every newsstand and paper mill in America. You will discover how he invaded Hollywood and radio, survived a near-fatal financial crash, and waged a lifelong media war against the President of the United States. This is the ultimate masterclass in the permanent politicization of news. Welcome to the Code of Yellow Journalism. The Code of the Printing Press and the Inheritance, 1863-1895. The Code of William Randolph Hearst was simple. Reality is negotiable. Influence is absolute. Born in 1863, Hearst was the only son of George Hearst, a self-made millionaire mining magnate and U.S. senator. Unlike his father, whose power was derived from the raw, tangible wealth of gold and silver mines, the younger Hearst understood that the true portable power of the modern age lay not in owning resources, but in controlling information. Hearst's path to media supremacy began in 1887, when fresh out of Harvard and expelled for various antics, he convinced his father to hand over control of the failing San Francisco Examiner. This inheritance was the crucible of his strategic philosophy. He discarded the dry, objective editorial style of the era, recognizing that it failed to connect with the burgeoning working-class population. His mission was not merely to report the news. It was to make the news compelling, sensational, and impossible to ignore. He introduced the first strategic pillar of his empire, sensationalism as currency. Hearst systematically transformed the Examiner into a visually loud, emotionally charged paper. He prioritized lurid crime stories, sex, scandal, and populist rhetoric. He understood that drama drove circulation, and circulation drove advertising revenue, which in turn funded more drama. This self-reinforcing loop was the engine of his early growth. He invested heavily in massive, dramatic headlines, often misleading, and used lavish photography and drawings to overwhelm the reader, recognizing that the visual language was more effective than dense text. The crucial, irreversible strategic move came in 1895, when Hearst acquired the failing New York Journal for a staggering $180,000. This was not just an expansion. It was a direct declaration of war on the established media giant, Joseph Pulitzer, and his immensely profitable New York World. This rivalry between the Journal, Hearst, and the World, Pulitzer, quickly escalated into a bitter, high-stakes circulation battle that fundamentally changed American journalism. It was in the heat of this war that the term yellow journalism was coined, derived from a popular, heavily contested color comic strip, The Yellow Kid, which both papers aggressively fought to feature. The Code of Yellow Journalism was based on 3 tenets: fabrication, exaggeration, and moral outrage. It was the deliberate use of manufactured scandal, exaggerated truths, and emotional appeals to bypass the rational judgment of the reader and directly influence public opinion. Hearst's goal was simple: to shock, entertain, and ultimately to command. To defend his quickly expanding editorial power, Hearst strategically implemented vertical and horizontal integration. He began buying vast timberlands and paper mills to control the cost of production, ensuring his rivals could not starve him of raw materials. Simultaneously, he expanded his syndicate to share content across a growing chain of newspapers, maximizing the reach of every scandal and editorial viewpoint he chose to manufacture. By the turn of the century, Hearst had not just bought a newspaper. He had laid the groundwork for a colossal media monopoly built on the manufactured outrage of the American public.
The ultimate proof of media power. The Spanish-American War, 1895-1898. Having successfully established the model of yellow journalism by crushing his rivals through sensationalism, William Randolph Hearst sought to prove the ultimate transformative power of his media empire. The objective shifted from merely dominating circulation in New York to commanding national policy and, specifically, starting a war. The target was the ongoing struggle for Cuban independence from Spain. The situation in Cuba was complex, characterized by instability and repression, but for Hearst, it was the perfect canvas. A clear-cut, emotionally charged narrative that could fuel sustained public outrage and guarantee massive, sustained circulation growth, finally defeating Joseph Pulitzer. This necessity gave rise to the second strategic pillar, the Code of the Propaganda Loop. Hearst instructed his papers, primarily the New York Journal, to abandon any pretense of objectivity. Cuba was systematically portrayed in hyperbolic, black-and-white terms. The Spanish forces were painted as savage, inhuman oppressors committing heinous Spanish atrocities, while the Cuban rebels were depicted as noble, Christian victims fighting for freedom. Every story was manipulated, often fabricated entirely, to serve this simple, emotional narrative. Hearst was successfully monetizing moral indignation. The famous, though often debated, exchange between Hearst and his commissioned artist, Frederick Remington, perfectly encapsulates the strategy. Remington, reporting from Cuba, allegedly wired Hearst, stating, "Everything is quiet. There will be no war. I wish to return." Hearst's alleged reply was cold and definitive. "Please remain. You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war." This directive confirms that the media was no longer reacting to events. It was actively constructing them. The entire manufactured crisis reached its irreversible climax in February 1898 with the sinking of the American battleship USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The cause of the explosion was unknown. It was likely an accidental internal event. But for Hearst, the facts were irrelevant. Before any official investigation could begin, the New York Journal published screaming, sensational headlines that immediately declared Spain guilty. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Hearst ran illustrations showing Spanish mines detonating under the American ship and offered $50,000 for information leading to the conviction of the Spanish agents responsible, a move designed solely to establish conviction in the court of public opinion. The relentless pressure applied by the Yellow Press was immense. The public, fueled by years of manufactured atrocity stories and the emotional shock of the Maine disaster, reached a fever pitch of jingoistic fervor, crystallized in the national cry, "Remember the Maine! To hell with Spain!" Despite the initial resistance from President William McKinley, the overwhelming manufactured public demand for retribution made war politically inevitable. In April 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. Hearst had successfully achieved the unthinkable. He had weaponized the printing press to initiate a foreign conflict, proving that a private media baron held more sway over national policy than traditional political institutions. His code of yellow journalism was confirmed as the ultimate strategic tool for mass manipulation.
Building the coast-to-coast monopoly and the flaw in the strategy. 1898-1918. The successful instigation of the Spanish-American War served as the ultimate proof of concept for William Randolph Hearst. The Code of Yellow Journalism could command national action. With this strategic validation, Hearst immediately launched a massive, decade-long expansion campaign to secure his dominance and transform his profitable New York papers into a true coast-to-coast media monopoly. This era marked the establishment of the third strategic pillar, the Code of Vertical Integration and Ubiquitous Reach. Hearst recognized that controlling a single newspaper was insufficient. Controlling the entire production and distribution chain was necessary to enforce his editorial will nationally. He aggressively employed both horizontal and vertical integration. 1. Horizontal expansion, the chain. He used his New York profits to rapidly acquire and launch papers in major metropolitan centers: the Chicago American, the Boston American, and the Los Angeles Examiner. By the time of his peak power, he owned nearly 30 major daily newspapers and almost 20 magazines, ensuring that his political line was disseminated simultaneously to millions of Americans from the Pacific to the Atlantic. 2. Vertical control, the supply chain. He purchased vast tracts of timberland and built his own paper mills to ensure a constant, low-cost supply of newsprint, thereby insulating himself from the rising costs that plagued his rivals. He founded the International News Service, INS, a private news agency, allowing him to bypass competitor newswire services and control the raw, unfiltered stream of information that fed his entire chain. This gave him absolute editorial command. With this unprecedented platform, Hearst commanded the political sphere. His column and editorials became the most powerful private political voice in America. However, this power was not enough for him. Hearst mistakenly believed that the power of the press should translate directly into executive authority, leading to the biggest strategic miscalculation of his career: the political pivot. Hearst launched aggressive, high-profile campaigns for political office. After serving 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, he ran for mayor of New York City, multiple times, most notably 1905. Governor of New York, 1906. He used his papers as blatant campaign tools, dedicating entire front pages to attacking his rivals and glorifying himself. Yet despite his overwhelming media visibility, he consistently failed to win the highest offices. The failure revealed a crucial, unaddressed flaw in the code of yellow journalism. While the strategy was brilliant at creating mass emotional reaction and telling people what to think, the sensationalism, constant personal attacks, and aggressive self-promotion created a profound public distrust. Voters recognized the self-serving nature of the propaganda. Hearst had become too polarizing and too associated with manufactured controversy to be entrusted with executive power. Hearst was forced to accept that his ultimate power lay not in being the president or governor, but in being the kingmaker, the one who could use his monolithic media machine to support, destroy, or spoil the campaigns of those who did hold office. He was the ultimate gatekeeper of public perception, cementing his strategic role as the unrivaled master of influence, even if he could not win the title himself.
Expanding the empire to film and broadcast media, 1918 to 1930. Having secured dominance over the printed word, William Randolph Hearst faced a new, critical strategic imperative. The 20th century was rapidly shifting attention from the newspaper page to the seductive power of moving pictures, Hollywood, and the instant reach of broadcast radio. To maintain his code of ubiquitous reach, Hearst understood that his empire had to control every platform of mass communication, not just the printing press. This realization led to the establishment of the 4th strategic pillar, the Code of Cultural Control. Hearst invaded Hollywood with immense capital. He founded Cosmopolitan Pictures, investing heavily in film production and distribution. While this was ostensibly a move to diversify his media holdings, the strategy was intensely personalized and often driven by his long-term public affair with actress Marion Davies. The film studio became a direct extension of his media manipulation machine. Hearst used his nationwide newspaper chain and high-circulation magazines, Cosmopolitan, to promote Davies's films aggressively, often blurring the line between objective news and blatant publicity. He leveraged his powerful political connections to ensure his movies received favorable distribution deals and his actresses received flattering reviews. This proved that his code of yellow journalism was now versatile enough to enforce his personal desires, leveraging corporate assets to achieve private, sometimes unprofitable, goals. However, the real existential threat to the Hearst Code was the emergence of radio. Radio was a formidable rival because it was instant, free, and bypassed his entire expensive paper and printing infrastructure. It offered immediate political communication and news delivery, something his newspapers could not match. Hearst's initial strategic response was defensive and aggressive. His newspapers launched furious attacks on the viability and morality of broadcast radio, attempting to discredit the new medium and steer advertisers away from it. When this failed to halt the tide of technological progress, he quickly pivoted to acquisition, adopting the "if you can't beat them, buy them" strategy. He began acquiring strategic radio stations, such as WBAL in Baltimore and WCAE in Pittsburgh, establishing his own broadcast network. This guaranteed that the editorial line, political slant, and cultural propaganda generated by his New York headquarters could be disseminated instantaneously across the nation, regardless of whether the audience was reading a paper, watching a film, or listening to the radio. By the end of the 1920s, Hearst had secured his status as the ultimate cultural gatekeeper. He controlled the news, he influenced political outcomes, and, critically, he was shaping the lifestyle, consumer habits, and social values of the American public through an integrated system of newspapers, glossy magazines, film, and radio. He commanded not just what Americans read, but what they saw, what they heard, and ultimately how they lived. This consolidation made his empire a terrifyingly powerful, monolithic force in shaping the modern American psyche.
The financial vulnerability and the collapse. During the Great Depression, 1930-1937, by the late 1920s, William Randolph Hearst's media empire had reached its apex, transforming his editorial and political influence into staggering personal wealth and material excess. This era was defined by the ultimate physical manifestation of his success, Hearst Castle, San Simeon. The colossal ongoing construction of the castle, a monumental sprawling complex on the California coast, alongside his sprawling New York penthouse and his voracious global acquisition of art, castles, and historical artifacts, confirmed the code of extravagance. This excess, however, disguised a fatal strategic flaw: over-leveraging. Unlike the highly discreet, debt-averse approach of dynastic financiers like the Rothschilds, Hearst ran his entire vertically integrated media machine on massive, unsustainable debt. He utilized aggressive debt financing and internal cash flow from his profitable papers to fund new acquisitions and subsidize his failing papers and his personal extravagance. The very structure that allowed him to build a monopoly so rapidly was dangerously reliant on continuous, high-volume advertising revenue. The Great Depression, triggered by the 1929 stock market crash, was the external force that exposed this structural weakness. The economic lifeblood of the Hearst empire, national advertising revenue, collapsed almost overnight. The rigid fixed costs of his empire, the massive payroll for reporters and staff, the relentless demand for newsprint from his paper mills, and most critically, the enormous debt servicing payments on his acquisitions, could not be met. Within months, the seemingly invincible Hearst Corporation, which had once commanded the nation's attention, faced imminent bankruptcy and total collapse. The crisis forced the implementation of the fifth strategic pillar, the Code of Financial Humiliation. The creditors, primarily investment banks led by the Guarantee Trust Company, stepped in. They refused to allow the ultimate collapse of the powerful media structure, but demanded a drastic, unprecedented price. Hearst, the man who had waged and won the Spanish-American War through his press and attempted to dictate presidential elections, was forced to cede total control of his own company. A vigilance committee was installed by the creditors to oversee every aspect of the Hearst Corporation's operations. Hearst was forced to accept a radically reduced salary, dropped from $500,000 to $100,000, and was ordered to immediately liquidate assets to pay down the debt. This liquidation included selling off vast portions of his irreplaceable art collection, real estate, including some European castles, and even the prized Cosmopolitan Pictures studio. The strategic irony was profound. Hearst had successfully built an empire on the principle of absolute personal command and influence, but his lack of financial discipline meant he could not command his own balance sheet. His authority was reduced to that of an editor-in-chief, subservient to the bankers who now dictated the terms of his survival. The financial masters, not the press baron, held the ultimate veto power, proving that even the most powerful media monopoly cannot survive without adhering to the fundamental code of financial prudence.
Waging war against the New Deal and the final pivot to conservatism, 1937-1941. Following the financial humiliation of the Great Depression, William Randolph Hearst's operational control was compromised, but the strategic influence of his massive media structure remained intact. His political philosophy, once a populist and progressive strain of the Democratic Party, hardened into a fierce, unwavering conservatism. This transformation set the stage for the final decade-long political battle against the most powerful politician of the era, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. The final strategic pillar of his active career was established, the Code of the Political Spoiler. Initially, Hearst had supported Roosevelt's early presidency, seeing him as a fellow progressive. However, the introduction of the New Deal policies, specifically increased taxation on the wealthy, the expansion of government regulation, and support for labor union power, was perceived by Hearst as a direct, existential threat to his personal fortune and the capitalist system he viewed as the foundation of his power. He famously called the New Deal communism and socialism. Hearst dedicated the entirety of his newspapers, his radio stations, and his newsreel coverage to a relentless, high-volume campaign of political character assassination against FDR. He recycled the core tenets of yellow journalism: exaggeration, distortion, and the creation of emotional narratives designed to generate public panic and outrage against the administration. This was a sustained war of propaganda intended to undermine the president's public trust. A second critical component of his political opposition was his absolute commitment to isolationism. As Europe spiraled toward World War II, Hearst used his media empire to fiercely criticize Roosevelt's efforts to support Great Britain and France. His papers consistently downplayed the threat posed by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, arguing instead that any American involvement was a plot by international bankers and foreign powers to drag the U.S. into an expensive, unnecessary war. This isolationist stance was deeply strategic. Another world war, he feared, would bring ruinous taxes, increase government control over the economy, and potentially lead to a repeat of the financial collapse he had just barely survived. Hearst's opposition was total, but its result was complex. While he never succeeded in destroying FDR, who won 4 consecutive terms, an unprecedented feat, his campaign achieved a powerful strategic goal. He successfully mobilized and unified a vast, nationwide conservative opposition base. His newspapers became the primary voice and propaganda channel for those who opposed the New Deal and interventionism, cementing his legacy not as a populist kingmaker, but as the ultimate uncompromising political antagonist. This continuous media warfare defined the modern role of the mass media as an aggressive, openly partisan weapon, proving that the sheer volume and unity of a single editorial voice, even when fueled by bias and exaggeration, could permanently structure the political debate and mobilize millions of voters for decades to come.
The ultimate critical response and the enduring code of manipulation. 1941, present. In the final decade of his life, William Randolph Hearst, though weakened by his financial collapse and his failure to defeat Franklin D. Roosevelt, continued to command his media empire. However, the ultimate, inescapable challenge to his legacy came not from a political rival, but from a 25-year-old cinematic prodigy. Orson Welles in his 1941 film, Citizen Kane. The film was an undeniable, thinly veiled, and devastatingly critical portrait of Charles Foster Kane, a character defined by enormous ambition, staggering extravagance, and profound loneliness. Kane was the mirror of Hearst, a media baron who used his immense power to command public life, but failed to secure the personal love and genuine connection he desperately sought. This attack sparked the implementation of Hearst's final strategic pillar, the Code of Narrative Control. Hearst was not concerned with the film's critical acclaim. He was concerned with its potential to permanently define his public legacy. He launched a ruthless, coordinated campaign against RKO Pictures, the studio that distributed the film, and Orson Welles himself. Hearst used the full force of his media monopoly. 1. Blackout. All 30 of his newspapers, their associated radio stations, and newsreel services were ordered to observe a total, coordinated ban on reviewing, running advertisements for, or even mentioning the film. 2 threats. Hearst aggressively pressured the entire film industry, threatening to expose the past scandals of the studio heads and stars unless RKO destroyed the negative prints of the film. This was the final, desperate attempt by the ultimate master of yellow journalism to control his own narrative. Hearst was attempting to erase the record using the very weapon he had spent 5 decades perfecting. The strategic failure of this final war was profound. Despite Hearst's efforts, Citizen Kane survived and is universally regarded today as one of the greatest films ever made, the single most enduring critique of media power and isolation. Hearst proved that, while one can command the present narrative, one cannot dictate history when confronted by determined creative opposition. William Randolph Hearst died in 1951. Following his death, the empire he had built on chaos and debt was restructured by his creditors and trustees. The empire was professionalized, streamlining the assets and selling off some of the excessive holdings, eventually transforming into the highly profitable, consolidated Hearst Corporation, which remains a media titan today, owning magazines, broadcast channels, and newspapers. The enduring legacy of the Code. Hearst's most lasting legacy is not the size of his fortune or the scale of his castle. It is the enduring strategic code he imprinted onto the media landscape. While Hearst died, the principles of yellow journalism survived and evolved. The monetization of outrage. Hearst proved that controversy and emotional manipulation are more profitable and circulate faster than objective truth. A foundational code for modern tabloids and cable news. The weaponization of partisanship. His war with FDR established the template for media entities to function not as reporters, but as unified partisan political weapons, fueling the polarization that defines modern political discourse. The Code of Ubiquity. His move to control print, radio, and film established the necessary strategic imperative for modern media companies to control every platform, internet, social media, streaming, to maintain maximum influence. The final lesson of William Randolph Hearst is that the Code of Yellow Journalism is one of the most powerful and dangerous ever conceived, proving that the person who controls the printing press, the radio waves, and the screens does not merely report on society. They command society itself.